Let's go back in vintage history. Classic cinema TV. Wendy's Classic Corner. Wendy's Classic Corner.
Hello, welcome to Wendy's Classic Corner. I'm Wendy, and today I have the opportunity to chat with Stewart Lee from the Golden Silent Films podcast. So let's talk silent film. I want to start out by mentioning that if you missed any of our shows, you can always catch all our episodes on my YouTube channel, Wendy's Classic Corner. You can also do a search for Wendy's Classic Corner on pctv21.org under the Watch Live tab. If you're interested in appearing on the show to talk about classic film, please follow me on my Wendy's Classic Corner Facebook page. Now, I'm thrilled to introduce our guest tonight, Stewart Lee from the Golden Silent Films podcast. Hello, Stewart. Thanks so much for joining me on our show to talk about silent film.
Hi, we're glad to be here.
Oh,
It's
wonderful.
an exciting event to talk about movies that you can't hear.
So let's talk a little bit about, let's start from the beginning, Stewart. Let's start from the beginning. So motion picture started out with Edison basically inventing a motion picture
Yes,
camera.
Yeah, but the French really upped it. They really leveled it up. There was a few names that really pushed the filmmaking in France and to a whole world extent really pushed it to the next level.
Yeah, it was like the French doing the innovations. You often think of the Americans being the big in the film industry,
Yes.
but in the beginning we have the French making. I mean, Edison's camera was kind of unwieldy. It wasn't very convenient. You could record, but people couldn't project the images. You just look at it like you're watching an iPhone.
Yes, and you started with the Lumiere brothers. They're the ones that kind of got the ball rolling. And one of the things they did best was little slices of life, a little bit of everyday life, people walking, trains moving, cars driving around, and they were doing some cool stuff. People loved it, but it really wasn't pushing stories, wasn't pushing a narrative, and that's where Alice Guy Blanchet comes in.
But we would say that they technically, the Lumiere brothers technically created the first
Yes,
motion
very
picture,
much
which was
so.
called Workers Leaving the Lumiere Factory.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
Very exciting,
Yes.
but actually at the time, the folks thought it was the greatest
People
thing.
loved
They'd come
it.
and
They
watch
sure
this.
did, yeah.
And the Lumiere brothers kind of, they did a real service to everybody in the French film industry in that they would go on these sort of exhibitions around France showing
Yeah.
people these cameras, and that's how Alice Guy Blanchet saw this, and she became interested in this, and she worked for Leon Gaumont at the time.
Yeah, she was a secretary.
She was a secretary.
Yeah, and when she saw what they were doing, she felt that she could do a little bit better. She could add a little something. And interestingly enough, Gaumont, who was her boss, said she could do it if she wanted to, as long as her secretary work didn't suffer on the side. So she was more than welcome to do it. Just don't let the secretary works slide a little bit.
Typical boss,
Yeah.
typical boss.
For sure.
But I think, being a woman, she did kind of bring something to it, and that's why I think we see that she creates the first narrative film. So instead of having this, just what's basic life, we're just filming basic life, she actually creates a story called The Cabbage Fairy.
Yeah.
And so on top of that, of course, she was the first woman director. And she also was the first person to put color in film. She would color tint the actual film reel. My apologies.
She would, yeah. And also she was also the first person to do sound with a film. So
And
she was ahead of the curve.
She was
on a
very
lot of-
innovative and not very well known. I mean,
Yeah,
a lot of
oh.
people don't know who she is.
Even after the fact, Gaumont went out of their way to basically deny everything that she did. They even wrote a book about the history of their company, and even though she worked there for 10 years, did a lot of amazing stuff, her name was not mentioned at all in the book. So
That kills me. But if you want to learn more about Alice Guy Blanchet, these French names are so difficult for me. If you want to learn a little bit more about her, there is a documentary, a really good documentary I highly recommend to anybody. It is called Be Natural, The Untold Story of Alice Guy Blanchet. And besides Alice Guy Blanchet and all these wonderful things she's doing, who else do we have that's French and doing some innovative stuff?
Georges Méliès.
Yes.
It was tough to say, but I think
Very
I got
hard
it.
to say. We hope we're saying it correct. I apologize to George if we're not.
But he was a guy who loved theatrical stuff, fell in love with magic, fell in love with artistry on stage, and he saw film as the next step up that he could do with take his talents and his creativity, and can really do some fun things on the screen with it.
Yeah, he's a magician, right?
Yes.
So he starts out, he's an actual magician, and he's like, well, why do all this difficult stuff on stage? Why not just do it on film? And he's like very responsible for many of the editing techniques that we use today, such as example of he innovatively started the jump cut, the stop motion, dissolves, matting, and double exposure. These are all techniques that were made by Georges Méliès.
Yes.
And he also made the first science fiction film, they say. If you watch his film, A Trip to the Moon, they say it's the first science fiction film. And if you've watched any of his films, it's very interesting and innovative. Like, he makes characters like appear and disappear, and it does look like magic. It's really phenomenal. And you can actually get copies of DVDs of his shorts in the library system. So I highly advise everybody to check that out too, because he's really a cool guy to watch.
And he actually learned about the jump cut by accident, on complete accident, when filming a carriage, I believe, on a street, and the camera stopped working.
Just jammed.
Just jammed, yeah. And by the time they got it working, it started recording again, except that little chunk in the middle was missing. So.
Yeah, so it turned like the carriage into a hearse, I think it was. And he was like, whoa, illusion on film.
Yep.
I'm all about this.
Yes, yeah.
So that was pretty much the basis. And then we're talking about late 1800s, 1890s this is happening.
Yes.
And like I said, the Americans haven't caught up quite yet, but they're catching up. I mean, we start in like the early 1900s, Americans start to get into the picture. We start seeing some American films. Everybody talks about The Great Train Robbery, one of the very early American Westerns, which we will also talk about next show.
Which was directed by Edwin Porter, Connellsville native, local here to Pittsburgh, Connellsville native, yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He was one of Edison's top lieutenants in the Edison movie company.
And so the Edison Movie Company, we're not talking about movies as we know them. We're not talking about Hollywood. Where is all this taking place?
We are looking at, for the most part, New York City, and it's reaching out into Fort Lee, New Jersey, which for about 20 years or so was Hollywood before there was a Hollywood.
And there's some great innovative directors from that time. I think we should mention D.W. Griffith. Not necessarily everybody's favorite, but did innovate a lot of film techniques that probably should be mentioned. He refined close-ups, so you would get the entire face in the frame. He would do scenic long shots showing panoramic views. This is common in some of his epics. And cross-cutting, which is mixing scenes together from various locations and just editing them together. So he did do a lot of innovative things for film. Of course, he's kind of a guy we don't necessarily love to talk about because of, Birth of a Nation and the racism. So he's kind of this guy that has this historical set. We need to talk about him in this historical sense, but we kind of put an asterisk next to his name. A great film that he did, one of the most popular silent films, ones that people think are some of the greatest silent films, is Intolerance. And the sets that he did for that are just phenomenal, and I think you can still go to the sets today.
I think I've seen photos of that.
But by that time they were in California.
Yeah, and a lot of those French folks that we talked about, they migrated to Fort Lee, New Jersey. You had Alice Guy Blanchet opening up the Solax company with her husband, and also the Méliès family. His brother came to New Jersey to set up what is Star Film, or American Méliès Film Company, to start an American subsidiary to do the work without having to send film reels
It's kind of like a
across the sea.
distribution.
Yeah. And so they did a lot of great work out here, or in New Jersey, I should say. But there were eventual things that prompted people to leave. But from about 1907 to 1930, Fort Lee, New Jersey was pretty much a mecca of filmmaking.
And why did they choose to leave and go to Hollywood? Just because they felt, oh, let's get some sun?
Well, that actually was part of it. The weather that California affords you gives you year-round access to filming locations, gives you access to a lot of great weather where you can film all year round. New York, New Jersey area, not so much. You're getting a lot of snow, dark. It's just not good for efficient use of your time. So a lot of people went for that reason. And also Edison was a bit on the litigious side, so he owned a lot of patents, and as he was often wont to do, was more than happy to crack down on anyone using those patents. So every film company that was working out of Fort Lee was paying exorbitant surcharges, taxes, patents, all this stuff. And people were kind of getting tired of it. It was putting some people out of business. So California was a lot more lax on their patent law, and a lot of stuff that Edison was able to really crack down on the East Coast, he didn't have any power on the West Coast. So people were more than happy to take their business elsewhere.
Yeah, I can't blame them at all for that.
Yeah.
One of my favorite silent film directors, he would have been in California, is King Vidor. I really like King Vidor. He did, one of my favorite films that he did is The Big Parade. The Big Parade, I believe 1925. It stars John Gilbert. It's this war, story about war. It's talking about World War I. Basically, King Vidor is so good at taking these human being characters and just making you feel like their emotional struggle and their psychological, what's going on psychologically for them. He's really amazing for that. He has a lot of realism in his film. He has a lot of morality in his film. He was a Christian Scientist, and that comes over in his films a lot. So The Big Parade, basically, you see John Gilbert. He's this young man, and all these people are enlisting. You know, the war's just breaking out, so all these people are enlisting to go over and fight. Now his mother and father, they don't want him to. His mother's all worried about him. And he's kind of torn, like, should I go fight or should I stay with my family? And you see, there's this one scene where there's this big parade. It's very patriotic. His friends are, come on, come on. And you can just see him, like, the band's playing, his toes tapping. You can see he's just getting, like, really riled up, and he just runs off and joins the army, you know, much to his mother's dismay. And then, you know, he gets into the army, and he starts to, like, realize what it is to be in the army and what's really going on, and what the struggles of war are. And he's going through all this trauma and emotional psychological things, and there's this one point in the film. It's so poignant. He's in a battlefield, and there's trenches, and he's fighting the enemy, and he sees this fellow who's a German soldier, and this fellow's trying to get himself to this trench. He's wounded. He's trying to get himself to this trench, and John Gilbert's following him, and he gets into the trench after him, and John's like, you know, oh, the enemy, I have to kill him, and this guy's just staring at him. Like, you can just see the soldier's face, and you can see John Gilbert's character just saying, like, I can't just kill this man in cold blood. And it's such a poignant moment. It's just such a great film. But so tell me a little bit about some of the films that you really enjoy.
Just in general, in real life, movie watching, I'm a big genre fan. I love horror movies, science fiction stuff. So those likes in current cinema tend to migrate to silent movies as well. So I like a lot of sci-fi stuff, a lot of horror stuff, which is a lot of German expressionist stuff. Metropolis is one of my all-time favorite, top 5 movie of any silent, talking, anything.
So what about Metropolis especially? Does it really makes you love Metropolis?
It's a movie that you realize the special effects, like it holds up just as well today, and like they're doing like just wild, incredible stuff, and the work they put into to bring that thing to life is just phenomenal.
And Fritz Lang directs.
Yes.
Fritz Lang, eventually he becomes an American director. He directs American films as well. Talk a little bit about German Expressionism, because I think it's a term that's thrown around and not a lot of people are that familiar with what that means.
It's it's a visual style, a lot of edges, a lot of corners, a lot of shadow, a lot of play with shadow, and very beautiful I can't think of the word.
Sets?
Yeah, like a lot of cool sets, but like the way the whole picture, the way the whole scene is filmed.
Yeah, so
is really
sorry.
stark and really has its.
Yeah, because you have like the sets a lot of times are distorted.
Yes.
So you have this perception. A lot of times they're even tilted.
Yeah.
So you have this perception of this person is entering a dreamlike world, although he's in reality, but the outside seems dreamlike. I think that's a big common thing in German Expressionism, and the high contrast lighting.
Yes.
And this all translated over really well for film noir. Was one of the things that sort of picked up this German Expressionist thing. It probably helps that Fritz Lang came over and did some film noirs.
Yes. Yeah.
And we talk about that film noir in another show as well. So besides, what about? Now, I almost don't want to say it because I will butcher the pronunciation, but the cabinet
of Dr. Caligari.
Yes, you say it. Thank you. So that to me, is that not the epitome of a
Very
German
much so, yes,
Expressionism
yes.
film? You really have this crazy sets
Yes.
and everything. It's very spooky, and I think that goes it's almost like a horror film
Yes,
too in a
yeah.
way.
And it's also, I don't know if it's the first, but it's one of the first movies with a twist ending. So.
Oh, that's right. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
But I won't spoil it for anyone out there that hasn't seen it, even though it's 100 years old.
So what about these silent films? A lot of silent films we can't see because perhaps somewhere along the line they've gotten. You hear a lot about lost silent films and people finding silent films. What do you have to say on that subject? How does that happen?
Like actually the vast majority of films that were made don't exist. When these things were originally made, they weren't made. Nobody was making them to look and watch 50 years from now. Mm. They were just to be used, make a few bucks on at the theater, and then pitch them or somehow get rid of them because they didn't want them back. It was a lot to send, so most of the times they just get thrown out.
The material being used sometimes was hazardous
yes,
as well.
Yeah, it was very flammable.
You hear about nitrate and stuff like that.
Yeah, it was very flammable, so it was easily. That's why back then you had a lot of film archives and stuff that would burn down, or they'd lose a lot of film because they were just self-ablaze, I guess. But
when they would make these films, let's just say George Méliès, however you say his name, I'm sorry, would make a film. They would he would send it around the places, but they would make copies to send to places, correct? He didn't send his original, obviously.
That's often.
So what a lot of these films that wind up being found wind up being some copy that's sitting somewhere.
Yeah, that's oftentimes how it happened. They would, someone's attic or some guy that owned a theater 70 years ago, his grandkids or whatever would find a roll of film in their basement or their attic, and a lot of movies died that way, but also we've found a lot of, Metropolis, we were talking about Metropolis before, almost a quarter to a third of it was thought to be missing for the longest time. And until, miraculously, they found almost an entire clean print of it.
Was it in Argentina? Or?
Yes,
yeah.
I
remember
it
being
South American. I believe it was Argentina. Yeah,
they located it in some old museum or something like that.
And it wasn't just. There was also legal reasons why some of these things almost didn't survive either. As if anyone's watched Nosferatu, Florence Stoker, Bram Stoker's wife, after he died, she found out she was the heir of his estate and all that stuff. And the makers of Nosferatu basically made an illegal copy of all of Bram Stoker's ideas, and they just changed some names, Germanified it a bit. And she won a court case in Germany to have every copy of the film destroyed, not locked up, not hidden away, but just completely destroyed. And
Wow.
but luckily, by the time the court case happened, a few had gone out to England, a few had gone out to America. So there were luckily a few out there, and
Well, thank
it
goodness.
survives today. Yeah, it almost didn't.
Yeah, I can't even imagine. So why should people watch silent films?
There is basically every silent film that was made, a lot of these people were doing stuff that had never been done before. Like now we know all the tricks, all the camera tricks, all the lighting stuff. But everything you're seeing in a silent film is basically people just making it up as they go along. And they're really coming up with some amazing stuff that we take for granted these days was pretty amazing back then.
And we didn't even get into like Charlie Chaplin or Buster Keaton and these great comedic Harold Lloyd, these great comedic silent film actors. And the things Buster Keaton was doing, like breaking his neck. I mean, the guy was like he was doing like these dangerous stunts. Harold Lloyd, dangerous stunts, safety first. And you know, it's just. Charlie Chaplin, of course, was very innovative in film as well, and you know, doing the whole thing with a score and having control over the entire thing. So, I mean, I just feel like if you're not watching silent film, like you're really missing on something beautiful. I mean, they are such beautiful films. There are some that are a little wonky, and you know, maybe the quality isn't so good. But you know, there's so many great Blu-ray restorations nowadays of silent films that you can go and you can get at the library, and it's just so wonderful to sit back and watch these silent films. I know I recently saw City Lights, a beautiful Blu-ray restoration of City Lights, and I mean, it's phenomenal. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, and if you thought like celebrity culture now is crazy, like when you go back to look at like the Valentinos of the time, and
we didn't even talk about Valentino.
Yeah, like it's wild how big and how powerful those people were back then. Like it almost makes celebrities today look
women,
like nothing.
When he died, women are like committing suicide. Like they were like serious about him.
Yes,
like he was this great, huge romantic star.
And it's not for no reason. Like they weren't that famous for nothing. So it's definitely worth looking into and learning about.
Absolutely. And Stewart, why don't you tell us a little? You do have a podcast. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
My podcast is called the Golden Silent Films Podcast, and for the most part, we take a look at a movie every episode, break down the history, how it was made, everything that went into it. But we also look at the movie itself, how the effects were done. We look at biographies of everyone involved in it, and also sometimes we take looks at some of the weirder, more obscure things, which I find incredibly interesting. As I've learned, I have ADHD when it comes to episode selection. I'll just find some weird little tidbit in someone's biography that I never knew, and then that'll set a whole new episode up that I never even contemplated being an episode. So I'm very looking for the next shiny thing. There's so much interesting stuff going on with all the making of all these films that whether it's I've done episodes on advertising and silent film, done biographies, a little bit of everything. So if there's stuff you like about silent film, I think we got you covered.
Yeah, so everybody should go check that out. And thank you very much, Stewart. That's all the time we have for today. And if you want to learn more about silent film, I encourage you to check out the Golden Silent Films podcast. I really enjoyed discussing silent films with you and hope our viewers have enjoyed the show. And remember, if you want to be the guest on the show, you simply have to follow Wendy's Classic Corner on Facebook or email me at wendysclassiccorner@gmail.com. Until next time, this is Wendy from Wendy's Classic Corner saying so long, and here's looking at you, kid.
Why go anywhere else for classic movies?